This is Nikki Naab-Levy, and you are listening to Results Not Typical, a podcast that challenges the traditional narrative of Pilates and fitness while tackling misinformation that is keeping you from reaching your fitness goals. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Results Not Typical. I have Erica Webb with me here today. She is a yoga, Pilates, and somatics teacher. And we're going to get into a few different topics, but I think the overall theme will be around this idea of how to remove self-judgment from movement and exercise, and sort of how to get out of that whole shame spiral or shoulding on ourselves, which is so unhelpful. And yet it's just such an easy narrative to fall into that also I think is kind of force-fed to us. So welcome, Erica, and thanks for being here to have this conversation with me today.
Thanks for having me, Nikki. It's a pleasure.
So we'll dive in pretty quick, but for anyone who's sort of not familiar with you or the work that you do you mind just kind of giving the brief intro kind of about who you are and your background?
Yeah, of course. So I am Erica, as you mentioned. I'm a yoga, Pilates, and somatics teacher down in Australia. So coming at you with this different accent today. I have been teaching for a little over a decade and really kind of don't teach any pure modality. I'm very far from a purist. So I really think of myself as a movement teacher more than anything, because I put all of those kind of elements together. But my focus has very much been my past was in an office. Like I used to have a real job, you know, there's like a whole bunch of story there, but the general gist of it is that at some point I really fell into a pretty dark hole, and my movement practice was useful, but the thing that really helped me to kind of pull myself out of what really became a very deep self-hatred hole was self-kindness. That was the thing that kind of just like tiptoed me out. It didn't scoop me out like in a big one fell swoop, but it tiptoed me out of this, hole that really was a self-hatred hole that was decorated with the self-loathing and the guilt and the shame and all of that stuff that comes with it. And so since that time, and this is like a lifelong pursuit, it's not like I've got it all figured out, but since that time, that has been the thing that's really informed my teaching as a movement professional, my practice. So I sort of end up helping people who I guess feel kind of broken. They're kind of feeling like either they're dealing with a lot of physical pain or just dealing with a lot of guilt around what they, like what you just said, around what they should be doing, what they think they have to do, that pressure from the world to appear a certain way or to engage in certain things, and really just trying to help people and myself ongoingly shift from that to focusing on like, what is it that you actually need to feel the way that you want to feel, and to be a friend to yourself, not an enemy.
Yeah, which I think is difficult to do.
To say the least. Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think so much of, and I think it's funny not to like automatically start bashing yoga and Pilates, which seems to be like the place I land, not on purpose, right? Because but the thing is when I say it just in fitness culture, sometimes the yoga Pilates be like, yeah, that fitness culture is bad. But I just want to point out there, right? Like I think in all of these cultures or these modalities, so much of not the modality itself or necessarily one individual is teaching it, but so much of the overarching culture is yoga every damn day, right? Like get in your meditation practice. It still turns into like, instead of being this thing where you sort of go with like, is this vibing or does this feel good for me? Right. It still turns into like this, well, it's a practice. You must do it daily. And you know what I mean? And to me, that's the same type of shoulding as you should work out every day. And we know that that's actually not true physiologically. That's not necessary or necessarily right for us.
Yeah. And the thing I think that is particularly rife in the yoga culture is that becomes very interwoven with morality. It becomes very interwoven with this vision of ourselves as people who do yoga. Therefore, I must be a good person, or I must, it becomes quite hierarchical. And I think, there's a lot of good things to say about the world of yoga, but honestly, there's a lot of darkness there. There's a lot of stuff that is unspoken. There is a lot of stuff that is injurious that we just don't talk about, or we talk about it more now than we used to. But even this idea of, you hear it so often in the yoga world of listen to your body. But I can tell you for damn sure that in all of my years moving through classes in the yoga world, it was said, but really what was rewarded or applauded was doing exactly what the teacher showed you to do, and being physically manipulated to make your pose look a certain way. And that was sort of the gold standard. You wanted to be kind of like singled out by the teacher to be adjusted so that you knew you were doing it right. And so it has the potential, and this is not everyone, we can't paint every yoga teacher with the same brush. We know that. But there is certainly something about the overall culture of fitness and wellness that decenters the individual as a decision maker about their own body. And that is very problematic. And that is the thing that we have to relearn. And it's hard. I mean, even through the lens that I teach, which is a very kind of person-centered, that person knows better than anyone else in the room what's right for them. I will still, and I don't teach in person anymore, but when I did, I would still have people kind of turn around and be like, am I doing this right? I'm like, I don't know. What does it feel like? And I do teach, I do quite therapeutic work, I guess, in the sense that I do often have people come in pain. And so I will like make suggestions for like, what would it feel like if you tried it like this? But I'm never going to make the assumption that I know better than them about what ultimately is going to work. So I can see things in people's bodies where I'm like, I wonder what would happen if they tried it this way. Would it feel better? Would it feel more, more aligned in their body? But I think that what we're up against in the greater culture is that there is a hierarchy. The teacher knows best. You know nothing. And what you do know is always up for debate. We've really, and you can't be kind to yourself in that picture because you're not the center of that question, I guess. I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that we say one thing, but we really mean another thing. And that can be very confusing for a consumer of yoga or any movement for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's like two things that came to mind for me when you were saying that is that, so one thing is as teachers sometimes, and this is not a judgment on the student or the client, but they walk in and they expect the hierarchy, right? They look to you and they go, you're the authority. And if you turn back and you look at them and you go, no, you're the authority. There's like this, like really, there's like this moment of cognitive dissonance where either like it scares them because they're like, no, I have to look to someone to tell me what to do. Right. That can be very scary. Or there's like an immediate mistrust of like, well, isn't it your job to tell me what to do? Right. Like,
yeah, you're bad. Oh.
Right. There's a little bit of that. And then on the flip side, if you are someone who has a certain level of self-efficacy, or I will say, like, if you're like me, a certain level of outspokenness or disregard for authority, it can still be really uncomfortable to unwittingly find yourself in a situation where the teacher believes in the hierarchy, even if you don't. And self-advocacy can be really difficult when you're in a room full of people and there's this teacher who thinks that they know best for your body and they single you out, which has definitely happened to me. And I think people would think that I'd be one to call it out, but most of the time I'm so shocked when it happens that, that I immediately go into like a trauma brain and disassociate and just let it happen because I don't want to have that fight in public. And so it really is a dance, but let's just assume that someone's listening and they're in a place where they've kind of bought in on this idea where they're like, no, I would like to have some self-agency. I would like to build some sort of level of self-trust and understanding, but it's really scary or really hard for me to listen. I don't know what I'm supposed to listen for. I don't know how to tell if it's right or wrong. Like I've been tuned out for so long, or I've been having people tell me what to do for so long, right? Or pursuing sort of these external goals. Where do I go from here? What sort of advice do you have, if any, or ideas for someone who's kind of in that place of they realize that seeking guide, I don't want to say guidance, but like looking for the answer outside of themselves clearly isn't working, but they sort of like don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's a huge question. It's a great question. It's a huge question though. And I guess the thing that I would say to start with is that we have to let both things be true at the same time, in the sense that we have to accept that, yes, we do still want and potentially need guidance, right? Like, why would we teach classes at all if we didn't need anything, right? So there is still this idea that you have to let both things coexist. But it's trying to figure out what your role is in that process. And so there's a few things that come to mind, I guess, for where to start. And the first one is that we have to want to take that responsibility. And that's a huge one, because honestly, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we really don't. Sometimes we're just like, please just tell me what to do. This is why we front up to professionals in the first place. We don't have an answer. We're like, just tell me what to do to fix this problem that I have. So when, we have to want to explore that. Before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about this idea of, the pendulum swinging really far in either direction when we try to change something. And so it's not about saying, well, hey, here's this way of doing things that is crap, and now we're going to swing the pendulum all the way over the other way and lose everything that was good about the way that we came from. So there's this thing of, we have to sit in the discomfort of the fact that multiple things can be true at the same time. And we have to sit in the discomfort of the fact that we won't know how to do this from the get-go, right? Like, this is something that we just keep going with. And just like a movement practice has to be sustainable for the long term, because we want to do it till the day we die, so does our pursuit towards more self-kindness and self-trust, because it doesn't come in one fell swoop. It comes in little moments where you're like, oh yeah, I did just give away my power there for a second. It comes in those moments where we just recognize the self-talk that's happening. So from a practical point of view, first, being in the company of people who understand it. If you're going to classes where there is a real power play going on, or a power dynamic that you're very aware of, find somewhere else to go would be my first suggestion. It's very hard to sort of change a system when you're kind of like in somebody else's system, right? And then really, like, in terms of what am I looking for? What am I listening for? It's going to be different for everyone. But for me, where I start is I question, am I shooting on myself right now? Like, when I'm, let's just take the example that perhaps you're trying to do a pose that feels really complicated. Questioning, am I just doing this because I think I should? Am I doing this because it feels good? Am I doing this because I think it should feel good, and so therefore I should try harder? Am I doing this because somebody else is expecting me to do it? Am I doing this because I've set the expectations for myself, right up here and the bar is really high? Or am I genuinely being either preemptive to my needs or responsive to the way that I feel? And I know that I can hear it as it's coming out of my mouth, I still don't get it, like, I don't get it. How do you do that? And I think the thing is that we have to just be paying attention to what's going on for us in any given moment. I think because it doesn't happen in one fell swoop, it's like hard to give the recipe. It's hard to give the formula. But it's paying attention to things that happen, even before we get to the movement space that we're practicing in. Like, what led you there? What are your expectations when you get there? How did you feel after? One of the really big things for me was always that I would front up for these things, but it had become a way of being, I think it had become a way of being virtuous as opposed to a way of being good to myself. And the thing with self-kindness is that it asks you to be really honest, right? So whenever I talk about kindness, there's this risk that it gets misinterpreted as softness, or as kid gloves, just treating yourself like a piece of precious china. But the thing with the reality with self-kindness is that it's actually asking you to be very, very honest. And so sometimes self-kindness is that kind of tough love, right? but it comes from this place of wanting to nurture yourself, wanting what's best for you, wanting what's going to lead you towards how you want to feel. And so I think we have to know what those things are, right? Like, how do I want to feel? Do I want to feel like I'm constantly at the mercy of this guilt trip that's going on? Do I want to feel like I have to live up to some expectation that either I have set or somebody else has set? I'm conscious of the fact that I'm possibly losing the thread. I can hear my child behind the door, just like sort of sitting there, and I can tell he wants to open the door. So if I've lost my thread, I apologize. But I think the main thing is really just like paying attention, not to what you're being told necessarily, although pay attention to that because it can give you some really good and useful information. Pay attention to like, what is the process that's going on inside of you? Because I think so often this cultural kind of soup that we're in, it starts with the thoughts that we're having before we then put them into action. And so just being aware of that is kind of like the first step. I mean, we know when we feel guilty. We know when we feel shamed. We know when we feel coerced. Like we get that feeling, but I think we're very good at ignoring it.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think you lost the thread, but
very early, Nikki.
But something that you brought up in that is this idea that self-kindness, kind of like self-care, isn't like always like this fluffy kid gloves, like treat yourself kind of thing, right? Like I always think of like the Parks and Rec, like reference or the meme, but it's really not like that. And I think, like you said, it comes to honesty, and sometimes being honest, let's be real, most of the time being honest with yourself is like deeply unpleasant because because it means you have to do things that you don't want to do. And you have to oftentimes, like, yes, whatever it is that you're doing is not working for you, right? Like you're overdoing it, whether it's in work or exercise, or you're guilting yourself, right? And you're exhausted, and like you have and you're overwhelmed, and you have all those feelings. But then I think that moment, at least maybe I'm just self-projecting, but for me, when I think about sort of like going through those processes and then ignoring them and then paying for it later, soon after, it's like you ignore it because on the other side of it comes, you have to change your approach, and changing your approach means stepping into like this unknown where you're like, well, it's bad now, but it might be worse over there. And that, I don't know if that's just like my brain, but that's how my brain often like that. Like I'll be like, this isn't working. I need to do something else. I need to try something else. I need to change my approach. I need to take a break. And then my brain immediately goes, but you don't know what's over there. You don't know. It could be worse. At least you know what this is, Yes.
And that's just a very human brain thing to do, because change is threatening. Change is threatening to a human brain. And so the resistance to doing something different and something new is very real. But I think I had a thought there and now it's just jumped out of my head. I think that honesty piece too, though, it is so uncomfortable because, oh no, that's what I was going to say. The self-trust thing, that's tricky, because we also, in that process that you just described, we don't trust that we can change. That we completely lack the trust that we can change. And so, I see this all the time. I'm sure that you see this all the time, where people are like, I want to do the classes. I want to do this thing. I really hope I'll show up for it. I really hope I can. And it's like, okay, this is where we've got to pause for a second, because if you don't, like, our identity, how we kind of think of ourselves and the way that we talk about ourselves really matters when it comes to what we will show up for. This was one of those pieces of, honesty that like kicked me in the guts when I, a few years ago, when this kind of really came to the fore for me. I had this moment of recognition that I didn't want to change, right? So I was a martyr, like through and through. I had 2 young kids, like 2 and a baby, and I was a martyr. I did everything. From, everything was cooked from scratch. Both my kids were in cloth diapers. I refused to do, all these things that would have just made my life easy. But I was very, very easy, as if it would have made my life easier. I was absolutely attached to the depths of my soul to being that person. And it took me a few years after that kind of crash to be like, actually, I'm not scared anymore of turning into something else, right? Like I'm actually the fear of staying here is suddenly much worse than the fear of something else. But I had developed at that point through these little practices of self-kindness, the ability to trust myself. And that's the thing that I think that we miss is if we don't trust ourselves to show up for ourselves, how could we change? We can't change if we don't trust that we're going to show up for ourselves. And so there's that piece. And then, yes, there is also the piece of like, I could try this and it might not work. And that's true all the time of everything. And the crazy wild thing is that it might work tomorrow and it might not work in 6 days' time. And then it might work again in 2 weeks. So there's this, we all want this kind of like guarantee of, if I'm going to put in the effort, it better bloody work because I don't want to waste my time, right? And I think in the seeking of that kind of like a silver bullet or whatever you call it, the golden bullet, golden answer, we miss out on where the real secret is, which is consistency and just literally just showing up for ourselves. I think we falsely believe so many things about what it is to be human. And one of them is that we, should feel consistently one way or another, or that if change is good, it should be easy, or, all these things. And so there's so much tied up in this, which is why I advocate for the fact that you have to be in it for the long haul. And if you don't want to be, that's okay. Like there's no should in that either. Like if you want to stay where you are, just own that. Just be like, you know what? No, this is where I am. Whereas we waste a lot of time and we lose a lot of energy shooting on ourselves and being like, oh, but I should. I mean, how many times do you talk to people and they're like, oh, I really should start yoga now. I really should start Pilates now. I really should do this. And you're like, but do you want to? And ultimately, I think underneath that question is often a no. And that's okay. But then we got to drop the guilt.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are so many good points in there that you just brought up. And something that struck me too, is you're talking about like the process of change. And you were like, yeah, a few years later, it started, right? Like, and I think that's the thing that people don't always appreciate, or like we cognitively understand it, right? But they were like, yeah. But let's get to the part where there's like that end result. And it's like, what that started made me think of is I'm doing this nutrition mentorship right now, which all we talk about so far, I'm like 3 weeks in, is like psychology. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the intake process. And she sort of has like an outline for like the notes that you can take when you're talking to someone and, noting like, and one of the things that comes up in that is like, what was the final straw that got someone to like take an action? And I think sometimes like, in nutrition, we can think of final straws, like some sort of like event or frustration with our health. But I think this applies to all aspects of life. And final straws are really interesting to me because since I had that conversation with her, I've thought a lot about like these little final straws where I'm like, I spend all of this time and energy. This is what you're sort of talking about. And we all do it, right? Where I'm like, I'm going to do the thing. I think I should do the thing. I should definitely do the thing. Should I do the thing? Maybe I'm not going to do the thing, right? It's like, and like, we actually like, I lose like entire days of my life thinking about doing something instead of actually doing it. Like I have like this like cycle of rumination before I actually get to the part where there's like an event. Like, it's like, what is your final straw? But I think it's worth noting if you're stuck in one of those cycles with a problem, which is all of us, like, I think it's worth noting like, okay, I'm not going to do this today. So I'm not going to put any more brain space to it. Right. It's fine. Just because I elect not to start yoga today doesn't mean I can't start yoga tomorrow. But I think there's something worth sort of noting like, I don't know if this is the right time. Right. And then I think that there has to be this moment of acceptance that you kind of brought up, which is, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work. And maybe if I can't change this thing about myself, because so often we come at this from a place of I'm broken and I need to fix it, then I probably have to find a place of self-acceptance. And I think that's the other thing on the side of the questioning and the trying that's so scary is like, wait, you're telling me I have to accept myself too? What is this bullshit? Like,
how hard do you want to make this activity? and I think it's interesting, like that whole that example of like, I don't have to start yoga today. This is where that honesty piece comes in too, because we can do that till the day we die, right? Like we could be like, I want this thing. No, I don't. I'm just going to leave it till tomorrow. I'm just going to leave it till tomorrow. At some point, you have to like make a decision too. Like I mean, honestly, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But at some point, too, if you know that is what is going to, or you hope that is going to be the thing that supports you to feel the way that you want to feel, there's two sides to this. Be kind to yourself if you haven't started yet, but also then when you do choose to start, recognize that there will be peaks and troughs in that process. And sometimes you will start and sometimes you will stop and whatever. But ultimately, there is a level of like commitment involved. And it's not that commitment that we think of in terms of, that practice every day, yoga every damn day. It's not that. It's a commitment that kind of takes out of the equation the before and after pictures, right, that come from the fitness culture. There is no end. And this can be either very liberating or very freaking scary. There is no end to this process. This is not a 30-day commitment. I mean, it can be, but ultimately your pursuit to be both kind to yourself and to treat your body well is something you are going to be engaged in until the day you die in some form or another. So if that's the case, then we get to play with what does sustainability, what does commitment look like, given the long goal here. Whereas I think because we see it as there being like an end point to things, I'm just going to get fit, or I will start once the kids are in school, or I will, we have these like hard start stop things in our mind about what kind of is okay or how we can like make it more tidy. We have got to accept that life is very, very messy and there is no hard start, hard stop to anything. Not that I've found anyway. I certainly haven't experienced that. And so that's where part of that honesty is too, is it's like, are you now neglecting yourself in some way through your fear of change? Or your fear, your lack of self-trust that you are going to be able to show up for this thing. So it's like there has to be the holding of the thing lightly so that you don't torture yourself. But so it's this same thing of this idea that two things can be true at the same time. Hold it lightly, but also commit and keep showing up for yourself even when that feels hard.
Yeah. And I think this is actually where, to kind of circle back to earlier in our conversation, it's like, well, what is the role of the teacher if the teacher's not telling you what to do? And I think the role of the teacher in some way, shape, or form is, and I think this is why I was drawn actually to this particular nutrition coach, because I was like, oh, this isn't about nutrition at all. This is about stages of change and psychology and holding space for people and helping people find autonomy, right? Like all of those things, because those are the things that we're all missing, like in all aspects of the movement, wellness, fitness culture. But I think this is where it can be helpful to find someone to help create a container for you to figure out what is happening in your head and for you to say the things out loud to another human being and for them to be able to, again, not take up the role of a therapist. This is also where therapy can be very helpful. Reflect something back to you so you can pause and be like, oh, that's what I believe. Oh, that's what I've said. Oh, that's what I'm doing. Right. Like, because, or, oh, I have this value, but these behaviors in no way align with the way that I want to feel, live, show up for myself, show up for other people. And I think that that's what gets lost in the shuffle of just do this yoga pose, yoga every damn day, just do this back bend, just follow this diet, right? When we start looking at morality, I think we lose the self-reflection that any of these processes can actually teach us. And that's what's so both frustrating and interesting to me.
It's fascinating. And you're so spot on about the sort of therapy element too. So my background is actually in psychology. That's what my degree is, in psychology. And I'm currently training to be a therapist as well, because there is no way to pull the physical out of what is going on in your head. They are so intertwined. And there is so much, and I think that's part of the thing that we don't think about as potentially consumers of fitness culture and consumers of wellness culture. All of the kind of like beliefs and ways that we see ourselves and the way that we see the world, these are influencing our movement. Even to the point of like the way that the world has been the last couple of years. The impact of stress on the way that we move, the way that we hold our bodies, all of this stuff is so intertwined. And so there is a sort of mental health element to a movement practice. And I think that, well, do I want to say this out loud? Do I, Nikki? I think that this is somewhere that yoga can get a little muddy, because there is absolutely threads of therapeutic reasoning in yoga. A lot of it, though, and this is where I'm like, do I want to say this out loud? A lot of it is kind of toxic positivity of like, drop everything before you walk into the room. This is a space to just be, positive. This, like, just think positive, just drop the thoughts, just do. And people cannot do that, nor should they necessarily. And so this is part of the self-kindness too, is it's like, I often say to people, like, don't leave anything at the door, bring it all with you, because this is going to inform how you move. This is going to inform what it is you need today. But we have to be careful that we're, as teachers, and I never like using the term stay in your own lane, because I think a lane as movement professionals is very hazy. I don't think it has clear definitions. But being aware of how that can affect how somebody feels too, because if we're telling people to be positive and just to drop all the thoughts, and they can't do that, there's guilt and shame involved in that too. And so, that mental health piece is humongous, and I think that it is a missing piece for a lot of us, because we can, on the outside, look like we're doing all the right things, but be riddled with guilt, shame, self-loathing. I know I certainly was on the yoga mat, and nobody would have been able to tell.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because that brings a few other thoughts to mind for me. Like, one of them is the scope of practice thing, especially when you start talking about the word coaching, right? So like in the mentorship, one of the things that we talked about pretty heavily was like, okay, when do you need to refer out to therapy, or when are you in your scope of you're just having a conversation with someone? And one of the things that came up was like, if it's on like a bell curve, right? Like, if someone is like having like real emotional and mental health distress, they should be in therapy. If someone's like pretty much doing okay and they just kind of want to move to like quote unquote flourishing, or like really feeling better or feeling good, then like, okay, we're kind of more in this coaching zone, right? But a lot of this stuff kind of happens alongside, next to each other. And then on the note of the toxic positivity, I had this whole conversation recently with a friend where this is one of our gripes. I'm going to get so much hate for this comment, but I'm going to go there. Like in the like somatic Pilates yoga world, where they're like, it's our job to make sure people are embodied all the time. And I'm like, screw that. Sometimes it's not safe or good or right to be embodied. And it is someone's right to be disembodied and disengaged if that is a safer, better choice for them in a moment that feels scary. Trying to force embodiment onto someone is really violating and really harmful. And to me it's just as bad as the toxic positivity. We always have to be embodied. Well, do we? Sometimes I think disassociation can be a really helpful strategy when you have no other way out of a really negative experience.
There's a reason why we do it. There's a reason why that's a human response to things. It's a safety mechanism. So, I agree 100%. And I know that through the pandemic, I had students who said, like, I don't want to show up, because when I show up, I just burst into tears. And it's like, on the one hand, that's fine. You can show up and burst into tears. But on the other hand, if you don't want to sit in that today, don't, and I think that's the thing. Like, and it's an interesting place to sit, because suddenly, as a teacher of movement, you have to be hyper aware of what you're saying. And I'm very conscious of the words that I choose, but I still see and hear, and I'm like, why did that come out of my face? I didn't want to say that. But I think this is where then that self-responsibility comes into, is it's like, recognize that your teacher is also imperfect and I was about to say inhuman, actually human. Wrong word. See? And so you have to take responsibility, because you are the only one who knows what it's like to live in your body. You're the only one who knows what you're feeling on any given day. And it might not be what you quote unquote should feel, in terms of, if you are, so often we hear people say, like, what should I feel in this pose? I don't know. Probably a better question is, what are you feeling? Then we can work backwards and figure out, like, is that what you want to be feeling? Is that kind of like the purpose of what we're doing? Does it work for you? There's, so many questions that you could go into. But if you ultimately put yourself in the place of authority, then, you can kind of pick and choose what you're going to take from what is being offered to you. And that's the way I like to think of teaching, is it's just like, it's an invitation. You can come along or you cannot. It's up to you. It's an offering. It's a tour of sorts that you get to decide, where am I going to engage with this? Where am I going to not? I like to disengage from my physical experience too. Like, I'm so far from the kind of stereotyped yoga teacher that I, for a long time, haven't really even wanted to use the word, because I don't fit the mold that I sort of see. But like, I bloody love long sessions on the couch watching Netflix. And I, like, there's plenty of things that I do that probably, if you were putting it on a scale of like health and well-being, wouldn't be at the kind of like correct end of the scale. But this is the beauty of being human, is we get to choose and we get to explore, and I just think we get to do it from such a different place when we eliminate, or, I don't know that you can eliminate guilt and shame, but when we're very conscious of that lens and using it a little bit as a filter, because I think it sets off alarm bells when you're like, oh my God, I feel so guilty because I didn't do the thing the teacher said. And, anyway, I can hear myself rambling.
No, but I think what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a very different experience when we explore whatever it is that we're doing or engaging in, whether it is a movement practice or Netflix on the couch, when we take out the morality piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that doesn't always get considered. And then when we take out the morality piece, I think, at least in my opinion, it creates a little bit more space for, okay, now is this serving me? And how, and how much of this is this serving me versus like this other thing that perhaps I could be doing. But I think things change when we take out the morality piece. And then it sort of creates this space to then be like, all right, I'm going to engage in this behavior. And I could spend all day watching Netflix on the couch. But I also know about myself that if that is the only thing I do, that at some point my neck will start to feel really crappy. And I would probably feel better if I took a walk.
Yeah.
And later down the line, how do I want to feel? I don't know. Tomorrow, I would like to feel rested, which may involve some Netflix on the couch, but I would also like my neck to not hurt, which might involve some walking. And you know what I mean? And I think that that's where then we can look at things from a place of like, it's a menu. There's no morality in it, but our choices do have outcomes. And
yes,
if we sort of double down on too much of one choice or one thing, it may have an outcome that we don't like, that we don't want to deal with later. And that's where I think there is something to be said for being like, let me sort of split the difference and pick a thing that's going to have a better outcome. Yes. But not like from a guilt or shame place, you know?
And that's the thing that's hard, is that like I know exactly what you're talking about but the line between that and guilt and shame is so fine. And that's where it's like, that's what people struggle with, because it's hard to get out of the loop of, but I should go for a walk. And it's like, no, you could go for a walk. You could. And either way, you're good. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, either way, you still have the same value as a human, whether you choose to go for that walk or not. So if we drop the should and we ask, I could go for a walk, And the question isn't even, do I want to go for a walk? Because so often it's like, no, like I don't. I genuinely don't even want to put my, like I'd have to go to the bathroom first. I need to find my socks. Like, there's so many things that you're like, no, I don't want to. So I like to skip further ahead. Like, do I want the outcome of what that is going to give me? Right. And then you have to take the morality out of it, because whether you go for a walk or you don't go for a walk isn't changing anything about your value as a human. And that's where I think we really struggle. And I know that's been the thing that I've struggled with the most. And it had a lot to do with the way that I was raised and the beliefs that, were kind of imposed. And it's hard to do that work, but I can promise you it's worth the effort, because and I still catch myself always. I still am like, oh, I should. And I'm like, should you though? Even things like, and my friends always laugh at me when I say this, but like cleaning the house, cleaning the toilet. I fucking hate housework, like to the point where I just, I hate it so much. But I really don't want to be using a dirty toilet. I don't want to be brushing my teeth into a filthy sink. So I look at it and I don't go, should I do these things? I actually just flip it and I'm like, do I want the sink clean? Yes. Okay. I have choices. I can either clean it and get the outcome I want. I can pay someone to clean it. I can ask my kid to clean it. Probably a waste of time, but I could try, and it flips it. So all of these things can become little practices in self-kindness and self-care potentially. But because we're taking the morality out of it, it's not like I have to clean my bathroom because there's company coming over. It's like, I'm going to clean the bathroom because I genuinely don't want it to look gross when people come in. It's a very different thing, but the line between the two is very fine. And that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, but I love that. I love the taking out the should I do this and just flipping it and going, do I want the outcome? Okay, I guess I'm going to take the action. Or maybe I don't really care about the outcome that much in this moment. Okay, screw it. Like, I think that's a much less judgmental form of self-talk. And I mean, we could take this conversation everywhere, but I'm just for the sake of time management, if you will, as we start to kind of wrap this idea of sort of self-kindness and self-talk and acknowledging that it's not just like bubble baths and cotton candy and unicorns. And it's oftentimes really difficult conversations between ourselves and sometimes another person. Do you have any kind of parting thoughts on this topic that we didn't get to that you just kind of think people should know or hear, or you wish people knew or should consider,
I mean, like you said, I genuinely could talk about this all day. So I probably have lots of parting thoughts, but the one that is coming to mind is one of the things that I guess ties into what we were just talking about is this realization that we are not robots, right? That we are not even supposed to be the same from day to day, moment to moment, week to week, season to season. And I think that can be one of the things that kind of leads us down the false path of like, what should we be doing? Because, there might be one day where we're like, I have no energy for anything and I'm going to spend the whole day watching Netflix on the couch. And suddenly, the guilt and shame that pops up, and it's like, but what if that's just what you need today? And then tomorrow you need something different. But we want this formula of just tell me what to do every day to be a good human, and I will do that. And it's like, there is no formula for that, because at some point, if you follow a formula every day, regardless of how you feel, you're still not going to feel good, because you're denying what's true for you at any given time. And so there's value in structure, there's value in consistency, 100%. But then also bring your humanness to the table and let that be okay. In fact, not just let it be okay, like embrace it, celebrate it. Because when we try to pretend that we're anything but human, and we're, these robots who've got it all figured out, it is honestly a recipe for exhaustion and disconnection from ourselves. Which is unpleasant ultimately at the end of the day. So let yourself be human, have your have your structure. If you love structure, there goes my dog. But if you but embrace your humanness, because if we try to deny it, then that's when we ignore the fact that, like, I'm not feeling very well today, I need to rest. And we're like, no, because watching Netflix in the middle of the day is bad and that makes me a lazy person, or whatever the kind of story might be in our head. It's like, what if you just gave yourself permission that that's what you need today? Like, nobody else has to give you that permission. That can come from you. And I think that's what we start to develop, is this self-trust, and knowing that, like, if I choose to do that today, it doesn't mean that that's what I'm going to do every day for the rest of my life until I die. It's just a choice that I'm making right now. And that choice will change tomorrow. Yeah, that's my final thoughts.
Yeah, which is, I mean, a really important, helpful one. Though, if you come up with that formula, like, take all my money, please.
I mean, everyone would give me their money, wouldn't they?
Right?
But this is what we're sold all the time. That is what you are literally being sold, is here is your answer. And then we do it and we're like, but hang on, I still feel human.
I know.
I want my money back. And it's like, if we could just embrace the fact that there is no answer and we're just figuring out the best answer today, honestly, like, what a freaking relief. Like, we can stop looking, because, and we can just follow what feels good. We can follow what supports us, and, not just necessarily what feels good in the moment, but like what supports us to feel the way we want to feel kind of day to day and longer term. I don't know. I just think it takes a lot of pressure off, because we don't have to buy into that next quick fix, because there is no quick fix. And that's just a part of being human.
Yeah, absolutely. And my PSA is, don't give anyone who sells that to you your money, because they're full of shit. But
yeah, that's right. Yeah. If I come up next week and I'm like, actually, I did figure it out, don't believe me, because it's not true.
It doesn't exist. Awesome. Well, for anyone who wants to connect with you, you also have a podcast, work with you. Where are sort of the best places to find you?
Instagram is definitely the best place to find me. I'm over there at Erica Webb Yoga. Where else am I? I am on the internet. So my website is ericawebyoga.com.au, because it's an Australian site. And yeah, I've got a podcast. It's called the Movement and Mindfulness Podcast. You can find that everywhere that you find podcasts. Nikki has been on my podcast, so you can find that episode. It would be really clever of me to be able to, like, say what episode number it was, but I don't know off the top of my head. And yeah, you'll find all the details of, different ways you can engage with me on my website and on my Instagram. But feel free to send me DMs and all that sort of stuff. I'm very easily accessible on the World Wide Web.
And I will link up everything in the show notes. But thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you, Nikki. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please consider leaving the show a rating and review over on iTunes. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Catch you on the next one.